Julie Ann Hansen was 15 years old when she disappeared on July 7, 1972, in Naperville, Illinois. An active student, she sang in the school chorus, played in the school band, and taught Sunday school. On that fateful summer evening after school, she borrowed her brother's bicycle to ride to a baseball game, a trip from which she would never return. Her family reported her missing when she failed to come home. Police and community volunteers searched the area near 87th Street and Knock Knolls Road, where they found her abandoned bicycle. The next day, Julie's body was discovered in a cornfield near Modoff Road and 87th Street. The autopsy revealed she had been kidnapped, raped, and murdered, sustaining 36 stab wounds from a sharp instrument. Despite intensive investigation, authorities couldn't identify a suspect or make an arrest. While convicted killer Major Morris was considered, no evidence connected him to Julie's murder. Morris would later murder 16-year-old Roberta Bobby Jean Anderson in September 1973. Bobby's body was found dumped on abandoned farmland less than a mile from her home, bearing 60 stab wounds. Both crimes shared disturbing similarities: young female victims who were raped, brutally stabbed multiple times, and left in rural locations. At the time of Anderson's murder, Morris worked as a teenage trash collector and suspiciously moved away days after her body was discovered. He remained free for 23 years until 1992, when a blood sample linked him to Anderson's murder. During a police interview, Morris confessed to raping and killing Anderson. His violent crimes shocked his wife, friends, and family, who described him as a gentleman with no prior criminal record. Morris was also connected to the September 1978 disappearance of Margaret Stern, who vanished while hitchhiking home from work, a murder he later admitted. While both Stern's and Anderson's bodies were found near where Julie's remains were discovered, Morris was ultimately cleared in Julie's case. Another suspect, serial killer and rapist Bruce Everett Lindahl, was eliminated in 2020. Lindahl was implicated in multiple 1970s to 1980s rapes and murders, including the 1976 killing of a 16-year-old DuPage County girl. His criminal career ended in April 1981 when he accidentally fatally stabbed himself in the thigh while attacking a teenage boy in his apartment. Though Lindahl operated during the relevant period and used similar methods, raping and repeatedly stabbing victims, 2020 DNA testing excluded him from Julie's murder. Naperville Police Chief Robert Marshall stated, "Over 49 years, we've pursued numerous leads and suspects, all eliminated through exhaustive investigation. The breakthrough came in 2021 when 76-year-old Barry Lee Welpley was arrested in Mounds View, Minnesota. At the time of Julie's murder, Welpley was in his late 20s and lived less than a mile from the Hansen family home. Genetic genealogy proved key. Crime scene DNA was matched to Welpley through a relative's DNA in commercial databases. Julie's case was never officially closed. Investigators persisted for nearly 50 years, with advancing DNA technology gradually providing answers. Julie's family expressed gratitude. "This has been a long journey. We're forever thankful to all who worked on this case." Welpley was held on $10 million bond in Ramsey County Jail before extradition to Illinois for trial. With DNA technology advancing rapidly, many cold cases may soon be solved, bringing justice to victims and closure to families. May the victims rest in eternal peace, and their loved ones find solace in justice served. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our new channel, where we uncover captivating and chilling cold cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss the twists and turns we have in store. Let's continue. The case of Lori Nesson. Any detective will tell you that sometimes all it takes is one piece of information to solve a case. Reynoldsburg police got that tip on a cold case after 46 long years. On September 28, 1974, Lori Nesson disappeared. She had attended a high school football game and subsequently a house party, according to police. Nesson was last seen walking home just after midnight. Nesson's naked body was discovered in a ditch on Rose Hill Road, but her garments were strewn across several miles. Due to the limited technology available at the time, the case went cold. At the request of Nesson's family, the Reynoldsburg Division of Police reopened the investigation in August 2019. Officer Craig Bradford took on the case because his daughter was 15 at the time, the same age as Nesson. Officer Bradford claims that the more he looked at the files, the more he discovered contradictions. Pictures that, at the autopsy showed some cuts on her lip, things that would indicate foul play. The time of death on Nesson's autopsy also didn't match up with when the teen was last seen. Bradford presented his findings to the Franklin County coroner in February 2020, who agreed to investigate the case. A few months later, the coroner's office amended Nesson's cause of death to undetermined homicidal violence. Then, in December, a local news channel broadcast an update on Nesson's situation. After the program aired, someone contacted him with information that night. The caller was Karen Adams' cousin, and she said the news article about Lori's death was quite similar to her cousin's homicide. A similar case had happened 6 months after Nesson's death, on March 9, 1975. Adams, then 17, was walking from her Whitehall home to a friend's house when she disappeared. The next day, her body was discovered in a ditch on Vengert Road near Black Cloak. The similarities were too strong to ignore. The authorities contacted the Franklin County investigator who was in charge of the Adams case, which had been solved in 2011. Franklin Clark added, "They drink, drive about the city, go anywhere they pleased, and approach girls and young ladies who were alone." Robert Meyer was 70 years old when DNA evidence linked him and Charles Weber to Adams' murder in 2011. He was apprehended by authorities in Cincinnati. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison, but he died in prison just a few years later. Weber, on the other hand, was already deceased and cremated, but his son submitted a cheek swab that revealed his DNA, proving his involvement in Adams' murder. Meyer and Weber were identified as the men responsible for Nesson's death by the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Nesson's family is understandably troubled by the fact that her sister's final moments were probably spent in terror at the hands of two men they will never meet. According to investigators, Meyer and Weber both had a criminal background that put them in the old Ohio penitentiary in the 1960s. Meyer was sentenced to 10 years in prison in 1963 for murdering a man with a hammer. Weber was jailed for robbery. Following their release, the two moved in together and lived in Whitehall in 1974. Both men were convicted 3 years later of raping and kidnapping at least 2 women in the Toledo area. According to the investigator, one thing is certain: they were serial murderers and rapists. They would lure victims into the car, joyride with them, and then sexually assault and kill them. Of course, knowing what they did to Lori and Karen, and knowing that there were about 6 months between that and then they were up in Toledo a year later, they surely would have had plenty of opportunities to victimize other young girls. The police are actively seeking information regarding similar cases from that period. Nesson's family expressed hope that her cold case will provide hope to other families. "I sincerely hope that this opens the door for other families who are waiting for answers," said her sister. "No one should have to wait 40 to 46 years for anything." The discovery of Stephanie Isaacson's schoolbooks was the first clue that she had been murdered. They were discovered by her father while searching for her at a desert lot a half-mile from her home. His 14-year-old hadn't returned home from school on June 1, 1989. When Isaacson called El Dorado High School, he discovered she had not been able to make it to class that day. Stephanie had been bludgeoned in the brush near the residential area of Stewart Avenue in Lynn Lane, where a Las Vegas police dog found her at 11 p.m. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Isaacson went home after the coroner had departed the parking lot and dialed a local radio station, telling them to play her favorite song, "Wind Beneath My Wings" by Bette Midler. The case would remain unsolved for the next 32 years. It only heated up again in 2020, when local entrepreneur and philanthropist Justin Wu donated $5,000 to the Texas-based Othram lab. Wu requested that the lab process a cold case from the Metropolitan Police Department to serve the community. The department then began debating which case should be chosen for the test. Dan Long, a cold case investigator, said his associate Terry Miller was the one who dug up Stephanie's file first. Miller built a friendship with her family over 3 years and gave updates every 6 months. At first, the lab was unable to match the DNA found in Stephanie's clothes. Nonetheless, Miller pressed on. In January, police sent the remaining 12/10 of a nanogram of DNA, the equivalent of 15 human cells, to the lab. For reference, a normal consumer genetic test on a site like Ancestry.com uses at least 750 nanograms. In July 2021, the department announced a match, breaking the global record for using the least amount of DNA to solve a case in the process. Othram Lab was able to create a DNA profile of the suspect using the limited usable sample. From there, genealogists created limbs of a family tree. Investigators probed deeper into the case and came up with two plausible culprits. They eventually settled on Darren Roy Marchand, who had been charged in 1986 with killing a 25-year-old woman. Unfortunately, there will never be a conviction. He committed suicide at the age of 29 in 1995. The DNA logged at his suicide was a match for the semen on Stephanie's garment. Stephanie's family was devastated by the news. During a recent phone conversation from his home in South Dakota, her father stated, "That son of a bitch got me twice. The first time he killed my daughter, and the second time I didn't get the chance to see him in the eyes." Marchand's biography has become hazy over time, and his family has declined to comment. However, some facts have been preserved. When he was 20 years old, he was charged with strangling 25-year-old Nanette Vandenberg in March 1986. Vandenberg was discovered naked in her East Trompcanoe Avenue apartment's bathtub, and Marchand's fingerprints were discovered near the body. According to his arrest report, Marchand was with Vandenberg at the now-defunct Nevada Palace Casino when she was killed. He confessed to detectives that he had left her there and gone to bed. After 2 days of testimony, the lawsuit was dismissed. The fingerprint evidence was deemed insufficient to proceed by the Department of Peace. Since then, police have linked the DNA found in that case to that found in Isaacson's case, and it was a match. According to Clark County District Court documents, Marchand was also awaiting punishment for open and gross lewdness when Stephanie died on July 1, 1989. He was charged with 5 counts of open and gross lewdness in January 1989, one for each of the women he was accused of publicly exposing himself to. Marchand pleaded guilty to one offense in April, and the others were dropped. He was sentenced to a maximum of 1 year of probation on August 29th, and 9 months later, he was released from probation. With the money donated to Othram Lab, Metro hopes to analyze at least one more cold case. Investigators are now trying to figure out why Marchand killed himself and if he had any other victims. "I'd like to think that he committed suicide because of the things he was doing," Long said, "but I can't tell you that at this point." Augustina Halibert was born on March 23, 1991, in the province of Buenos Aires, Argentina. She belonged to a well-known family and was the eldest of 3 daughters of the couple Carolina and Edgardo Halibert, who served as the Secretary of Health of their city. Her uncle, Herman Halibert, held the position of tourism minister and was a pre-candidate for deputy in the Rio Negro region. Consequently, the Haliburton family was widely recognized in their province and other regions of Argentina. Those who knew Agustina since her childhood consistently praised her outstanding qualities. She was described as a sensitive, sincere, and loving child who had a passion for dogs and excelled in design, crafts, and decoration. Helen, who shared her adolescence with Augustina, observed her creative talent from a very young age. Helen recalled that when they were in school together, each class was assigned a theme, and Augustina always took the lead in decorating the classroom entrance with her impressive drawings and giant models. While her classmates were cutting and pasting, they followed Augustina's lead because they knew she was steps ahead, creating incredible models. Augustina also had a strong interest in fashion. She even designed the graduation sweaters for her high school class. Those close to her affectionately called her Agos and described her as sociable and an excellent hostess. She loved dressing up, and during her teenage years, her friends often gathered in the garage of her house for pre-dance parties. She would try to introduce her different groups of friends to each other, always striving to connect people. Augustina enjoyed baking and cooking, and she was skilled at it. She had a keen sense of taste and excelled in many things. She had a curious nature, and when something piqued her interest, she pursued it. After completing her secondary education, she initially enrolled in architecture but later abandoned it. During that time, she focused her energy on fashion design and studied it for a while, but she ultimately changed her direction. Nevertheless, she was a successful young woman who used her knowledge to chase her dreams. She even started her own clothing brand, worked as a model, and was building her career. At some point in her adult life, Augustina's path crossed with Juan Manuel Riverter, with whom she began a relationship that seemed to be going well. Little is known about Juan Manuel's life, and even the names of his parents have not been disclosed. Only a text from an acquaintance referred to them as Moni and Maurizio, and other family details remain unknown. The only accessible information about Juan Manuel is his LinkedIn profile, where he is promoted as a software engineer, a graduate of the National Technological University in Argentina, although his listed place of residence was Toronto and its surroundings in Canada. Interestingly, a search in the university did not reveal him as a graduate. Instead, a resolution from the university's Superior Council in 2017 stated that he had not passed 2 subjects during the periods of February 2008 and February 2009, which led to him losing his status as a regular student in the field of information systems engineering. Augustina and Juan Manuel's relationship began during the pandemic and was characterized by ups and downs. According to some of her family members, he exhibited psychological violence toward her and was controlling. However, the situation escalated in the summer of 2021, marked by more serious conflicts and violence perpetrated by Juan Manuel against Augustina. Her father shared that she was deeply affected by the relationship, but with the support of her family, she rebuilt her life and had no contact with him for a whole year. Around September 2022, Augustina decided to move to Mexico, specifically to the picturesque beach town of Playa del Carmen in the Riviera Maya, to further her modeling career. She rented an apartment, leaving behind her comfort zone in her native Argentina and putting a considerable distance between herself and Juan Manuel. In Mexico, Augustina lived by doing advertising appearances as a hostess and engaging in modeling activities. She aspired to travel the world while pursuing her modeling career. She loved Playa del Carmen and was genuinely happy there. She found work quickly and was thriving. She had many friendships and the support of a childhood friend who was also living in the area, so Augustina was not alone. Furthermore, she brought her dog with her for emotional support. Augustina's passion for travel was evident in her social media posts. Brazil, New Zealand, China, and European capitals like Madrid, Paris, London, and Brussels were some of the destinations that Augustina had the pleasure of visiting and sharing with her 16,000 followers on Instagram. One of her future plans was to move to Europe. Candela, Augustina's 21-year-old sister, had come to spend the summer in Playa del Carmen. She wanted to enjoy the beautiful Mexican beach area and be close to her older sister. The two decided to share the apartment where Augustina lived because it had 2 rooms and they would be comfortable. In December, Augustina's ex-boyfriend, Juan Manuel, reappeared. He came to visit her for the holidays, they reconciled, and he stayed to live with both girls. Candela would never have chosen to share an apartment with her sister's boyfriend, but things happened so quickly that before she realized it, the man was settled in Augustina's room. In her recent conversations with her family, Augustina admitted that they had decided to rekindle their relationship and announced that they planned to move to Spain. However, the peace in their relationship was always short-lived. On Thursday, February 16th, there was a major argument because Augustina had discovered infidelity. The atmosphere in the apartment was extremely tense. On the afternoon of Friday, February 17th, 2023, Candela left her sister alone with Juan Manuel. When she returned the next day at 7 in the morning, she tried to enter her sister's apartment, but the door was locked. She asked the building's doorman if there was any way to enter, and he informed her that screams and a fight had been heard in that apartment during the night. The police had been called twice due to the neighbors' complaints. Candela went back to the apartment and insisted on trying to get in. She entered the access code, but it didn't work. The door was locked from the inside, so she had to knock. After persisting several times, her sister's boyfriend finally got up and opened the door. Almost immediately, Juan Manuel asked Candela where Augustina was, and she criticized him, saying how could she know where her sister was if she had left the previous evening, leaving the couple alone. She insisted that he should know where Agostina was, but he replied that she was sleeping. While they argued, Agostina's small dog began barking, and Candela followed the sound to the bathroom of the apartment. There, she found Agostina with a bathrobe belt around her neck, tied to a hand towel holder that was only 4 feet high. Agostino's sister and her boyfriend untied her and brought her to the living room, where they attempted CPR, but Agostino was already dead. Candela then called the police, and the forensic experts examined the scene and took the body to the morgue, where an autopsy was performed, and she was immediately cremated. The case was initially classified as suicide, and it was considered closed. However, despite the decision of the Mexican justice system, the Halliburton family suspected that Agostina's death was actually a murder committed by her boyfriend, and they had their reasons. In late February, Edgardo sent a letter to the Foreign Ministry. The letter, which reached the office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, requested action from the competent authorities in Mexico and explained that the family had experienced a situation of helplessness regarding their daughter's death. He detailed that the judicial procedure was riddled with shortcomings because none of the basic protocols were applied to investigate the real causes of her death. The boyfriend was not detained, his phone was not confiscated, and no toxicological tests were conducted, nor were any injuries checked. In addition to all this, the family had no access to the case. Despite efforts by the Argentine consul to obtain copies of the proceedings, he was unsuccessful. Meanwhile, Edgardo recalled that the Foreign Ministry had an obligation to investigate and punish violence against women and to guarantee the family's right to clarification regarding the circumstances surrounding Agostina's death. Regarding this ongoing case, the Foreign Ministry's action is of utmost importance because, given the conditions of the investigation in Mexico, Juan Manuel is free to act. Since Agostina's death was classified as suicide, her partner's legal situation is not compromised at the moment, which is why he is not considered a fugitive but a person of interest for the family. However, it is essential to bear in mind that both Agostina and Juan Manuel are Argentine citizens, and the Foreign Ministry must ensure the rights of both individuals, even if it is proven that the man committed the crime of which the family of the deceased influencer accuses him. On her part, Carolina, Agostina's mother, embarked on a crusade in the media to seek justice and put pressure on Mexican investigators. She denounced the violent relationship between the victim and her partner. Carolina asserted that her daughter was killed by her boyfriend, and she mentioned in a televised interview that her daughter had been tortured, burned, abused, and beaten, including blows to the head, all prior to her death. She was convinced that he had staged the supposed hanging from a towel rack. Agostino was a tall girl, and she was dressed and ready to go out when Candela found her. According to Carolina, nobody who is contemplating suicide takes the time to get dressed up. She recalled that Juan Manuel had a history of violence. During a press conference shared on social media, it was revealed that the couple had been dealing with ongoing issues that had been kept a secret. She mentioned that the man had never inspired trust, and 2 years earlier, they had rescued Agostina from the apartment she shared with Juan Manuel after a physical assault on her part. She stated that if they hadn't gone to rescue her that day, her daughter would have lost her life at that moment. After that violent incident, Agostina chose not to report it, and her parents decided to respect her decision, although they believed it was best not to let such incidents go unreported to the authorities. The consequences of not taking action at that time were felt 2 years later in Mexico. According to her mother's account, on Friday, February 17th, Agostina sent a message at 2:30 p.m. saying that she felt ugly and believed that she did not deserve a man who would hurt her. Carolina's provided support from afar and encouraged her to leave the apartment. She reminded her that there was no need to be with that man. She advised her to kick him out of the house and not even get upset about a person who wasn't worth it. In her opinion, her daughter, by returning to that violent man, had played a risky card, and it ended badly to her regret. The model's uncle, Herman, stated that Juan Manuel's parents had contacted the family and promised to cooperate. However, the dialogue ended when the man did not show up for a Zoom meeting where he was supposed to share his version of the events. Regarding this absence, Carolina said that he had remained in hiding but was likely listening and watching everything to stay informed about the case. In her view, he would have given his version if he had nothing to hide. Angry and frustrated, she said that Juan Manuel's parents were responsible for covering up what she considered a monster. On March 8th, International Women's Day, there were marches in Mexico and Argentina demanding justice for Agustina. This increased pressure on the Mexican prosecutor's office, which announced that it would investigate the death of the Argentine model as a possible femicide. This decision was based on the autopsy report, which showed signs of head and facial injuries, multiple lacerations on the body, and bruises consistent with sexual abuse. A forensic expert hired by the Halliburton family analyzed the official report and pointed out various signs of violence, such as punch marks on the mouth and a significant head injury. Additionally, the forensic expert noted lacerations in several parts of the body and internal and external hematomas, suggesting recent and non-consensual sexual activity. However, the only available evidence is this forensic report because, as mentioned earlier, the Mexican authorities proceeded to cremate Agustina's body shortly after classifying the case as suicide. Following the mobilizations on International Women's Day, the Mexican justice system announced that it had reclassified the case, originally labeled as suicide, and had begun investigating it as a possible femicide. The family's lawyer stated that the case had been referred to a special unit equipped to handle such cases. She further accused the main suspect, Juan Manuel, of attempting to stage a suicide and highlighted signs of violence at the scene. The apartment was locked from the inside. There were visible injuries on both the victim and her partner. A table light was found out of place and on the floor, and 2 calls had been made to the police the previous night. She also criticized the judicial investigation, revealing that the crime scene had not been properly secured, contrary to protocol. It was essential for the scene and the victim's body to be preserved until the investigation concluded. She added that due to numerous errors, information that could have been obtained from the devices was lost since the perpetrator took the cell phones and all the data with him. The investigation into Agustina's violent death in Mexico promises to be a challenging journey for the family, which has been following the case from Argentina, more than 7,000 kilometers away, with a different legal system and culture. New statements were made by the prosecutor of the state of Quintana Roo on March 13, 2023, asserting that the Argentine model and influencer had taken her own life perishably and scientifically. These declarations were made during a press conference held by the security cabinet of that Mexican province. The prosecutor detailed that there was a history of violence both before and during her relationship with her partner. He stated that it could not be ruled out that Juan Manuel might have induced her to take her own life, and that could be a matter of investigation. When questioned by journalists about the cigarette burns on the woman's body, he assured that these injuries occurred before her suicide. He explained that there had been violence the night before her death between her and her partner, and there was sufficient evidence of this. Regarding Juan Manuel, the prosecutor stated that he had been interviewed by the investigative police, and at that time, they did not have enough evidence for an arrest or any other legal action against him. However, this did not mean that he would not be pursued later if a connection to Agustina's death could be established. Edgardo, Agustina's father, insisted on the need to change the classification of the case, as their lawyer had found numerous pieces of evidence to classify it as femicide. When asked by an Argentine media about the prosecutor's statements, Herman, the victim's uncle, expressed that they were not surprised that the Attorney General was defending the suicide theory because acknowledging that there were many elements suggesting femicide would mean admitting their failures. He believed that the prosecution had acted clumsily and hastily in the early stages of the investigation, leading to the loss of crucial evidence. However, as the case was transferred to the specialized unit, it indicated that something had gone wrong, as it is not common to replace a team that had performed well. He argued that the prosecutor was trying to defend the initial theory because going in a different direction would be an acknowledgement of their poor work. Gerardo Reynoso, a journalist, provided details of the judicial process. He explained that the Prosecutor General's office reclassified the death as femicide due to pressure from Agustina's family, the lawyer, and a feminist march on March 8th. However, in the subsequent hours, the justice system announced that they were still considering the suicide theory. He highlighted that, in general, The prosecutor's office did not want to validate the independent expert opinion that had found injuries compatible with femicide. Recognizing this would mean accepting that someone outside the prosecutor's office had solved a problem they should have handled with a properly executed expert analysis. Regarding Juan Manuel's situation, he pointed out that the prosecutor's office would have to call the boyfriend to discuss the case. In the event of her suicide, he would inevitably be part of the investigation, at least in the statements that should have been taken to determine what had happened. To make matters worse, the journalist emphasized that the crime was discovered on a weekend, and during weekends in Mexico, intern trainees and junior investigators typically handle duties. This could have been the reason why everything was mishandled. He believed that their actions were not malicious but rather due to a lack of experience, and this was reflected in how the case was handled. Some days later, in Argentina, news surfaced about a call received by Agustina's father. A couple of days after the Women's Day March, a prosecutor from Quintana Roo contacted Edgardo by telephone on the instruction of the state prosecutor's office, who wanted to speak with the family. Before hearing from the father, the person on the phone, speaking on behalf of others whose identities were unclear, stated that the system wanted to apologize for what had happened. They emphasized that if Agustina's boyfriend bore any responsibility, they would certainly prosecute, as there was no intention within the prosecutor's office to cover up anything. They added that if any public servant from the prosecutor's office was found responsible, measures would be taken. He also quickly clarified that he would organize a meeting with the general prosecutor and a team of experts to show the father what they had. He stated that the general prosecutor had instructed that other state agencies in Mexico should also review the autopsy. Then, the prosecutor, who had been speaking gently, abruptly shifted his tone and raised a complaint. He mentioned that it had been claimed that they did not follow the femicide protocol, and he argued that every death of a woman was worked on according to the femicide protocol. Edgardo also dropped the formality and transitioned from being a grieving father to one demanding justice for Agustina. After asking the prosecutor for his name, he directly addressed him as Carlos and firmly presented his point of view on the matter. He told him that if supposed experts found a young girl deceased in the situation she was in, hanging with a man inside the residence, and they didn't detain that man, didn't take his statement, and didn't seize his phone, then the investigation left much to be desired. He added that after reviewing the autopsy and witnessing what his daughter had endured, the conclusion for him was that everything had failed, a 100% failure, because his daughter had died. The latest information came in March, just days before the 1-month anniversary of Agustina's death. The hypotheses of suicide and femicide are still being pursued on separate tracks. Helibert's lawyer said that the case had been transferred to the Women's Crimes Division, meaning Agustina's case is now on the femicide and gender violence table. She continued to work with the prosecutor handling the case and focused solely on demonstrating the femicide angle, providing more evidence and investigating the boyfriend's involvement. She apologized for not being able to provide more details but explained that all leads related to the murder were under seal. Regarding the question of when Juan Manuel could be arrested, the lawyer stated that it would depend on the conclusion of the investigation and that it was up to the prosecutor to determine if sufficient evidence had been provided or if more was needed. However, she reiterated her confidence in being able to prove everything. Neighbors reported hearing screams until around 2:30 in the morning. According to statements obtained after that time, silence prevailed at the scene. The time of death listed in the incomplete autopsy report is 4 a.m. While Agustina's family continues to demand justice, the alleged perpetrator is in an unknown location. Although the Mexican justice system has not issued an arrest warrant against him, and no judicial proceedings have been opened in Argentina because the alleged crime occurred in another country, he remains free. However, he has not made himself visible and has not faced the family of the girlfriend he supposedly loved and lived with until the day of her death. This case is still in development, but due to its preliminary stage, many proceedings are conducted discreetly and away from the media. The prosecutor's office investigating the alleged femicide issued a document to determine Reverter's whereabouts. The order was issued on June 7th by the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for the Investigation and Prosecution of Femicide to search for, locate, and request Reverter's presentation without depriving him of his freedom. As stated, the goal is to expand their interview to gather more information and comply with this authority's request. Minor Liz Minnie Soraniano murder case. It was a chilly winter day in 1999 when a 13-year-old girl, Minor Liz Soraniano, aka Minnie, never returned home from school. She was in 7th grade, very smart, and considered a bit mature for her age. Minnie loved poetry and had a deep fascination with rainbows. After several days of being missing, this flower-like girl was found dead in a dumpster in the Bronx, New York. She was found stuffed in a bag inside the garbage bin. Although the medical examiner initially dismissed the possibility of sexual assault, traces of semen were later found on Minnie's sweatshirt. The cause of her death was determined to be strangulation. The NYPD formed a task force in 1999 to investigate the case, with Detective Michael LeGiovane as one of the lead officers. What followed was an intense round of interrogations involving both close and distant acquaintances of Minnie's family. DNA testing was conducted extensively, with samples taken from Minnie's clothing, hair, and nails, but the results showed no matches. New York City Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Barbara Sampson said, "The hardest cases we deal with as medical examiners are those involving children. What was done to her has haunted me for nearly 20 years. When it's a homicide like this, and there are no solid leads, that's the most troubling kind of case for us." After a year of intensive investigation with no conclusive findings, the team lost momentum, and the case went cold. However, nearly 2 decades later, the NYPD reopened the case under Raymond, a first-grade detective in New York. They conducted numerous inquiries, interrogations, and investigations until they developed a plausible theory. Minnie was murdered by someone she knew, not a stranger. Using the latest familial DNA testing technology, a major breakthrough was made. Once the DNA results came in, detectives narrowed the search to 5 relatives of Martinez, people who could have been connected to Minnie's murder. There's one fact about Minnie we haven't shared yet. This bubbly girl had a deep interest in astronomy. One of her classmates revealed that Minnie dreamed of becoming an astronaut, but sadly, that never happened. Detectives obtained her journals and found a list of astronomy websites she followed, proving her passion for the subject. When DNA test results narrowed the suspects to 3 people, one of them being Martinez, aka Jupiter Joe, he became the prime suspect. Why? Because Martinez was on the 1999 list of tenants in the building where Minnie lived with her family. Thanks to advanced DNA testing, investigators made a crucial discovery. Martinez's DNA matched the semen found on Minnie's sweatshirt. Martinez, popularly known as Jupiter Joe, earned his nickname by giving improvised astronomy lessons to children worldwide. He even had a YouTube channel where he uploaded astronomy-based videos. This seemingly good-natured man was, in reality, the monster behind little Minnie's murder. He brutally killed her by strangling her neck and attempting to sexually assault her. When Minnie died during the attack, the cold-blooded Jupiter Joe callously dumped her body in a Bronx dumpster. Martinez believed he had escaped justice. After all, the NYPD hadn't caught him for over 22 years. But now, at 49 years old, Jupiter Joe was finally arrested. Detective Raymond said the arrest was a tremendous relief. "I hope she's smiling at us. I hope she sees all the people who cared and knew she wasn't forgotten. Now, Minnie can rest knowing her murderer will rot in prison. Justice prevails." The Bonnie Baker murder case dates back to June 1998, when Bonnie Baker was last seen alive. She had a lively personality and had gone partying with her friends at the Fort restaurant in Morrison to celebrate her pay raise at work. And guess what the most horrifying thing is? Her body was not discovered until the following year. Only in 1999 was her body found on Navajo land. But this is not yet the end of the mystery. Sadly, the identification process of the skeletal remains took another 14 years. An unknown woman dialed 911 to inform police that a woman had been murdered in her apartment on Louisiana Avenue. She even told the Denver police that the suspect, Crespin Nane Perez, Bonnie's boyfriend, was heading toward Mexico with the victim's body stored in the trunk of his car. Later, on July 1st, 1998, a major breakthrough occurred. Police located a red geoprism that had crashed near Globe, Arizona. Strikingly, the car matched the description provided by the caller. Officers examined the crash site and found blood evidence in the trunk. Yes, things only grew murkier from there. The most horrifying moment came on July 31st, 1999, when two boys riding horses discovered a human skull on Navajo land in New Mexico. Along with the skull, other skeletal remains were found. Despite exhaustive forensic analysis and an autopsy, the body remained unidentified, and the cause of death was undetermined. Years passed before, in 2012, the Denver Police Department finally confirmed through DNA that the remains belonged to Bonnie Baker. Upon this discovery, police swiftly moved to arrest her boyfriend, Nane Perez. On the very day Bonnie celebrated her pay raise with friends, Perez had been fired from his job. They worked at the same place. Already enraged by her celebration, he confronted her at the party and snapped. It wasn't until 2021 that Nane Perez was arrested by the Denver Police Department in Mexico. Now, he faces a long legal battle of trials and hearings. Bonnie Baker's soul can finally rest in peace, and we are relieved that she has received the justice she deserved. Gail Baris murder case. A 30-year-old woman named Gail Baris from Battle Creek did not return home after she was last seen at Speed's coffee shop. Battle Creek was shaken to its core by this brutal homicide of the 30-year-old woman. Almost 2 weeks after Gail's disappearance, her body was found by the investigating team. It was on River Road in Emmett Township where the police discovered the remains of the woman. And that was exactly when they learned that Mrs. Baris had been raped and then stabbed to death. There was one person who had not lost hope through this entire ordeal of investigations and inquiries: Mrs. Baris' son, James Baris. He had relentlessly tried to help the police in every way he could. Ultimately, on January 25, 2021, James received the call he had been waiting for several years. He said, "Sergeant Marshall called and informed me that he just received a call from Michigan State Police Labs indicating that it had come through. In fact, some of the early tests ruled Plato out. DNA was still in its infancy, and I have documents that indicated he had been ruled out. However, there were subsequent tests that were conducted on other pieces of evidence, including blood, that came back inconclusive. The police investigated the family and a couple of Gail Baris's friends to see if they could provide any leads. Out of the two friends of Mrs. Baris, there was a person named Mr. Roger Plato, who had already been killed after being shot by the police during a violent confrontation, which occurred 3 days before the police came across the remains of Mrs. Baris. Although Plato's body was cremated, the police had collected his blood sample because this very blood sample helped them trace the murderer of Mrs. Baris. The rapist and murderer was none other than Gail Baris' friend, Roger Plato. The murderer of Mrs. Baris was not found for a long span of 30 years. Eventually, the case turned cold, and nothing came of it. 30 years is a long period, and we can't even imagine how James and his family endured such torment. The lives of the Baris family were changed forever after that traumatic incident, and all they had hoped for was to see the murderer brought to justice. Destiny has its way of punishing people for their deeds, and perhaps that is why Roger Plato died in that confrontation long before Mrs. Baris was even found. I think it is a relief for most of us and a weight off our shoulders just having an answer. And that, to me, was the biggest thing," said Baris. He even said, "I think if somebody was around today, now we'd have to endure a trial, which then creates a lot of other issues. And then we potentially don't get a conviction. And then what? Even with a DNA match, because so much time has elapsed, eyewitnesses have either passed away or they can't be relied upon for their statements 32 years later. So I'm kind of glad it wound up the way it is." In the heart of Buenos Aires, Argentina, a vibrant soul named Natalyia Melman came into the world on the 13th of March in the year 1986. She was the third child in a family of 4, comprising 2 boys and 2 girls, born to the loving couple of Gustavo and Laura. Theirs was a comfortable middle-class household, sustained by the hard work of her parents. When young Natalyia was just 6 years old, her parents made a life-altering decision. They decided to uproot their family and seek a new beginning in Miramar, affectionately known as the City of Children. The Melman family longed for a serene environment that would connect them with nature, shield them from the hustle and pollution of bustling cities, and enable them to build a harmonious life together. Their journey led them to Miramar on the 7th of November in 1992. Nestled on the Atlantic Ocean coast, Miramar enchanted with its picturesque landscapes and captivating beaches. Its population hovered around 35,000 residents, and the city's economy thrived during the vibrant summer tourist season. Agriculture and agro-industry played significant roles. As the year 2001 dawned, Natalyia found herself immersed in her studies at high school. She was a brilliant student, consistently achieving top-notch grades. However, her commitment to academics did not hinder her sociability. Among her peers, she was celebrated for her infectious cheerfulness and outgoing nature. Such qualities led to her being chosen as the class representative, a testament to her popularity. Yet, like any typical young person, Natalyia cherished her moments of leisure. She frequently embarked on adventures to various dance venues where the rhythm of life blended with her youthful spirit. In the vibrant nightlife of Argentina, these venues are commonly referred to as boliches, and they often attract a young, enthusiastic crowd. Natalyia, a bright and determined young woman, had a clear sense of how to balance her pursuit of fun without compromising her aspirations. She was deeply committed to her responsibilities and had her eyes set on a future that held a special place in her heart, a future in medicine, with a particular fascination for obstetrics, where she envisioned herself helping bring new life into the world. Natalyia possessed a level of maturity and charisma that made her seem older than her years, endearing her to a wide circle of friends. Despite being in a relationship, she confided in her close friends about lingering feelings for her previous boyfriend, who had also moved on to a new romance. Her mother fondly remembered her as a passionate and loving young woman. On the evening of Saturday, February 3, 2001, just 1 month shy of her 15th birthday, Natalyia found herself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. Weary from overthinking and worrying, she decided to embark on a night out with 2 of her friends, seeking a temporary escape and a chance to clear her mind. Their night led them through several establishments, beginning with La Cantina, a bar situated just a stone's throw away from Miramar's picturesque pier. Later, they ventured to Amadeus, another bustling locale in Miramar, a short distance from their initial stop. As the early hours of Sunday, February 4th, approached, Natalyia unexpectedly crossed paths with her ex-boyfriend, Juan Maximiliano. She contemplated striking up a conversation, driven by a desire to rekindle their romance, but was disheartened to find him in the company of another girl named Diana. Faced with this disheartening scene, Natalyia made the decision to leave the bar and head back home. Dawn was breaking, and Natalyia had experienced a tumultuous night characterized by moments of joy interspersed with spells of sadness. Her emotional state fluctuated from laughter to introspection in the blink of an eye. At around 7 in the morning on that fateful Sunday, February 4th, Natalyia bid her friends farewell, unaware of the harrowing ordeal awaiting her as she walked away from the bar. A sense of vulnerability and solitude accompanied her, the residue of the night's mixed emotions. Unbeknownst to her, a man named Gustavo Fernandez, often referred to as El Gallo, had begun trailing her from a distance. Gustavo was a figure with a troubled history. In those early 2000s, at the age of 30, he carried a past marked by incarceration. In the pre-dawn hours of February 4th, he had been present at one of the entertainment venues Natalyia and her friends had visited. During this pivotal moment, a sinister plot had been set in motion. Gustavo, while enjoying himself at the bar, was approached by 3 officers from the Buenos Aires Province Police. These officers joined Gustavo, and together they concocted a disturbing plan. While Natalyia had ventured several streets away from the bar, lost in her thoughts and weary from a night of dancing, an unexpected police patrol pulled up beside her. Gustavo, who had been surreptitiously tailing her, launched a shocking assault. A violent struggle ensued as he forcefully attempted to coerce Natalyia into the patrol vehicle. Initially, he resorted to physical aggression, striking and pushing her. Despite her brave resistance, Natalyia was overpowered by the sheer strength of her assailant. In a harried and alarming manner, Gustavo succeeded in placing her inside the trunk of the vehicle. Remarkably, Gustavo then continued to walk away nonchalantly, as if nothing untoward had occurred. Meanwhile, the three police officers sped off with Natalyia towards the outskirts of the city. Their destination was a rustic cabin in an area devoid of basic amenities like water and electricity. It was a remote and desolate location chosen as part of their sinister plan. Back at the Melman family's home, the arrival of the morning on Sunday, February 4th, initially seemed like any other day, but swiftly transformed into a day of anguish. Laura, Natalyia's mother, sensed that something was amiss when her daughter failed to return home for the night. Natalyia had always been diligent about communicating her plans and whereabouts, making her absence deeply unsettling. Laura contacted Gustavo, Natalyia's father, and together they embarked on a mission to visit Natalyia's friends' homes to gather information. Filled with mounting doubts and growing concern, they engaged in conversations with Natalyia's friends. It was during these conversations that they pieced together the events of the previous night, including Natalyia's movements before leaving the bar. Upon learning about the places Natalyia had visited and the events leading up to her departure from the bar, Laura and Gustavo initiated a search. They checked local hospitals, beaches, and various locations throughout Miramar, desperately searching for any sign of their daughter. However, their efforts yielded no results, and as night descended, they were left utterly distraught and without any clues regarding Natalyia's whereabouts. In their mounting despair, Natalyia's parents made the heart-wrenching decision to report her as missing. When they reached out to the authorities, the officers they encountered classified the incident as a case of a runaway from home rather than a disappearance. This unusual turn of events marked the beginning of a series of suspicions and irregularities that would soon unfold. Gustavo and Laura couldn't bear to think of the worst possibilities. But the unnerving silence from Natalyia confirmed that she was being prevented from reaching out to them. Natalyia's disappearance was far from a voluntary act on her part. The initial response from the police raised eyebrows due to their apparent lack of urgency in the case. By February 5th, local media outlets had started featuring Natalyia's face, and soon, national media joined the coverage, all reporting on the young girl's disappearance. As Natalyia's family and friends tirelessly sought answers, witnesses gradually emerged, confirming they had seen Natalyia leaving the bar, with Gustavo following her as she moved away. Simultaneously, in a show of support for the family and concern for Natalyia's welfare, the Miramar municipality provided Laura and Gustavo with an office space. At that point, they lacked even a telephone to gather information about their daughter. This space became a hub for people to share leads and provide crucial details regarding the case. Laura and Gustavo were determined to uncover the truth surrounding their daughter's disappearance. The office's glass front was covered with posters bearing Natalyia's face, serving a dual purpose: to keep their daughter's image at the forefront of everyone's minds and to ensure the confidentiality of those coming forward with information. In the days following Natalyia's disappearance, extensive search efforts spanned various areas of Miramar and even extended to Mar del Plata, a locality approximately 20 kilometers away, based on reports of Natalyia being seen in the area. The police conducted various operations, interviewed potential witnesses, and established traffic checkpoints. But regrettably, these efforts bore no fruit. Simultaneously, rumors began to circulate, suggesting possible police involvement in Natalyia's disappearance. The police investigations extended to another coastal area in the Buenos Aires province, as suspicions grew around certain police officers' roles in the case. Gustavo, initially a witness, gradually faded from his usual places of visit, eventually disappearing entirely. This development frustrated the Miramar community and deeply distressed Natalyia's parents. They felt betrayed and couldn't comprehend how the prime suspect in their daughter's disappearance had managed to escape scrutiny. Days turned into weeks, and the official authorities remained tight-lipped, prompting the community to express their dissatisfaction. A series of protests erupted, demanding answers regarding Natalyia's case. These demonstrations, attended by both locals and thousands of tourists, consistently called for Natalyia's safe return, with around 8,000 people marching each night, vowing to stay on the streets until she was found. On February 8, 2001, a young woman was exploring the iconic sand dunes area of Miramar. While traversing the terrain, she made a grim discovery: the lifeless body of a girl just 800 meters from where police had been conducting search operations. The girl's remains were in an advanced state of decomposition and partially covered by clothing. Visible signs of abuse and indications of forced intimacy were evident. A cord was found around her neck, suggesting strangulation. While it was presumed to be Natalyia, local forensic authorities had to confirm her identity. Gustavo, Natalya's father, had been away, seeking tracking dogs to aid in the search for his daughter. He learned of the discovery through television news, and the shock and grief were nearly unbearable. Meanwhile, a local resident reported his attempts to search the area near the discovery, but was thwarted by the police. His suspicions of police misconduct deepened when he realized that the body had been found near the location where officers had barred his return to the area. The discovery of Natalya's body ignited public fury in Miramar, exacerbated by suspicions of police involvement. This anger escalated into violence, resulting in significant damage to the police station. The case's prominence compelled government authorities, including the Minister of Security and the President of Argentina, to remove the initial lead investigator in Natalya's case from his duties. As more details emerged, it was revealed that Natalya's body had been found lying face up, bearing signs of severe brutality, including burns on various body parts and evidence of forced encounters with multiple individuals. Forensic analysis revealed genetic material from 5 different men, and her resistance was evident beneath her fingernails, indicating a fierce struggle. Authorities confirmed that Natalyia had been held captive for several hours and that her pleas for release had been ignored. Following her death, it was presumed that her body had been kept in the same house where the events occurred for 4 days before being transported to the dunes, where it was ultimately discovered. Given the irregular conditions of the case and the alleged police cover-up reported by the family, it wasn't until September 2002 that the trial took place. 3 out of the 5 murder suspects, the police officers Ricardo Suarez, Oscar Ibanez, and Ricardo Anselmini, were brought to trial, along with a 4th individual, Gustavo Fernandez, who was identified as the one responsible for handing Natalyia over. In mid-October of the same year, the Second Criminal Oral Court of Mar del Plata established the guilt of the 3 individuals through skin, saliva, and pubic hair samples. Additionally, traces of soil found on Natalya's shoe were deemed consistent with the soil from the remote house, serving as evidence in the trial. The court sentenced the police officers Oscar Ibanez, Ricardo Anselmini, and Ricardo Suarez to life imprisonment with additional penalties, considering them co-authors of the crimes of aggravated illegal deprivation of liberty, aggravated sexual abuse, and triple qualified homicide with cruelty, treachery, and in collusion with 2 or more persons. Gustavo El Gallo Fernandez was also sentenced to 25 years in prison. There was a law in effect during the time of Natalya's kidnapping and murder that led to further reductions in the sentences of those responsible for the teenager's homicide. They once again sought the benefits of temporary releases, and remarkably, their requests were granted once more, every 15 days, twice a month, and for 12 hours each time. Ricardo, and Oscar could leave prison and return to their homes. During one of these instances, when he was free, Ricardo unexpectedly encountered Laura in a supermarket. Overwhelmed by anger, she shouted at him repeatedly, labeling him a murderer. But he simply responded with a smile. This incident shed light on the fact that the oversight of the measure granted to the former police officers was inadequate. The permission was intended for them to go to their residences, not to freely roam the city as if they had no pending legal matters. These glaring irregularities provided a strong argument for revoking their benefits. However, due to the difficulty in placing trust in the local courts, Gustavo, Natalya's father, resorted to a hunger strike in front of the Palace of Justice in Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina. This act of protest yielded results. In a case marred by irregularities, Gustavo managed to have his sentence reduced to 10 years. He was released in 2009, even though he was accused of another murder in Miramar. In June 2018, the trial of Ricardo, an active-duty police officer with over 20 years of service, commenced. This officer had been under investigation since 2002, as he had been partially identified from the DNA samples taken during the investigations. However, he was later acquitted. He faced charges as a co-perpetrator of deprivation of liberty and legitimate freedom, along with the use of violence, aggravated sexual abuse with penetration, in collaboration with 2 or more individuals, and double aggravated homicide, committed to ensure the impunity of the co-perpetrators of a previous crime. He declared his innocence despite the fact that the pubic hair found on Natalyia's body matched his DNA by 97%. Tragically, not only was he acquitted, but he was also not expelled from the police force. The judges concluded that the accusation could not be substantiated. However, the verdict faced appeals from the prosecution and Natalyia's family's legal representative. On November 13, 2019, the Buenos Aires Court of Appeals nullified that acquittal and ordered a new trial. In the meantime, the criminal defense attorney of 2 former police officers who were incarcerated declared to the media in early 2023. She asserted that her clients, Oscar and Ricardo Alfredo, met the eligibility criteria for parole. During a hearing at the Mar del Plata Court of Appeals, she formally requested their early release. She also emphasized that the prison service reports had been favorable, highlighting that her clients had maintained impeccable behavior, with no records of infractions throughout their incarceration. From her perspective, they had already served the requisite time as mandated by the law. Once again, the parents of Natalyia, ever watchful, attended the hearing and voiced their plea against the early release of the 2 former police officers convicted for their daughter's tragic fate. Fast forward to mid-May 2023, Ricardo, one of the police officers, age 65, received a life sentence for his involvement in the abduction, sexual assault, and murder of Natalyia Melman. Following the court's verdict, Laura expressed that the quest for justice continues, awaiting the identification and prosecution of the 5th individual involved. She made it resoundingly clear that her maternal determination knows no bounds and that the fight for justice will persist until all those responsible for Natalyia's untimely demise are held accountable. The Natalyia Melman case underscores the paramount importance of a trustworthy and impartial justice system where individuals responsible for criminal acts, regardless of their background, face the legal consequences commensurate with their actions. The unwavering dedication of Natalyia's parents played a pivotal role in ensuring that justice ultimately prevailed, preventing corruption and a lack of transparency within certain law enforcement circles from obstructing the pursuit of truth and accountability. Natalyia's mother has reiterated again and again, "Our battles do not waver. While we cannot bring our daughter back to life, we must relentlessly pursue the 5th individual involved. It is through collective strength that we continue our pursuit of justice." Emma Jane Walker was a 14-year-old high school student. She was a delightful young lady with a very close-knit family and friends who loved her to death. Emma got admission into the Knoxville Central High School, Tennessee, just 2 years before her death. Her friends described her as having a bubbly and fun personality. She was the only one in her junior year to get selected for the Central High cheerleading team. She had a bright future and she wanted to become a nurse. Amidst her charismatic personality, craved love. Therefore, while cheerleading, she caught the attention of William Riley Gall. William was 2 years older than Emma and was a star football player of his team. At that time, Riley was already dating a girl, but broke up with her to be with Emma. It was a perfect love story. A popular football player and a cheerleader, they both seemed to be head over heels in love with one another. Emma's friends described Riley as a bit shy but extremely possessive about her. Their love story made Central High's headline as Emma kept posting on social media how happy she was with her boyfriend. Emma's parents also described Riley as a very sweet and generous guy who always made their daughter laugh. Despite their approval of Riley, they kept a close check on their daughter's phone so the couple wouldn't cross any limits. Fast forward a few months later, Riley's behavior started changing immensely as he started controlling whatever Emma did. Her parents saw this toxicity in their daughter's relationship and decided to step in and take her phone away. This did not stop Emma from contacting Riley, as he gave her an iPod Touch with which she would text her boyfriend secretly. 2 years had passed and Emma was 16 years old now. Her relationship with Riley kept getting worse day by day. Riley would text her things like, "You are dead to me and I won't ever see your face again," to things like, "I am really sorry, you know that I love you." It was getting harder for the Walkers to see their daughter suffering because of her boyfriend. Riley's mom, Jill Walker, asked Riley to stay away from her daughter in order to protect her. Finally, in the fall of 2016, Emma broke up with her player boyfriend. Around that time, Riley had graduated high school and had been a junior in Maryville College, which was only 30 minutes away from Emma's house. This was a deal breaker for Riley as he tried to take his own life by swallowing Vicodin pills in his dorm room. His friends witnessed his behavior and how much he was obsessed with Emma. Meanwhile, Emma's life started getting better. She started spending quality time with her family and friends and also realized that she deserved better. Things started getting normal for the Walker family as the breakup proved to be healthy for their daughter. It was a normal Saturday and Emma was at a friend's house celebrating their victory in the annual football game. Around midnight, Emma started receiving mysterious texts. The text asked her to come outside alone or they will kill someone she loved deeply. She told her friend Zach about these anonymous messages and he suspected that it would probably be Riley trying to get back together with Emma. Terrified by the text, Emma and Zach went out and found a man lying face down near a ditch. To their surprise, it was Riley. He told Emma and Zach that he had been kidnapped and did not remember anything, as he was unconscious. Nobody believed him and said that he was doing this just to get sympathy from Emma. A day or two had passed when Emma had been home alone and saw a man in a black hoodie standing outside her window. She was terrified and texted Riley out of fear that, "I hate you, but I need you right now." He got a text from Riley that he was speeding over to her house to save her. Jill Walker came back to check up on her daughter and found Riley sitting in her front yard. She got furious and asked Riley to leave her property immediately. Emma told her mom the entire situation and asked her to be gentle with Riley, as he was only there to help her. Emma's friends again suspected that the mysterious man who was stalking her was none other than Riley himself. Following the days after this incident, Emma's parents never left her side as they were scared for her daughter. By Sunday night, everything had gotten back to normal. November 21st, 2016, it was a normal Monday morning when Jill Walker went into her daughter's room to wake her up for school. To her surprise, her daughter had no pulse. She freaked out and called 911 immediately. The ambulance came and rushed Emma to the nearest hospital, but it was too late. Emma was already dead. The hospital observed that she had been killed due to gunshots. The demise of a 16-year-old girl's death with a notably bright future made headlines throughout Tennessee. The investigations began as the Walkers and the entire Central High was mourning the loss of Emma Walker. Many condolences came in, including Emma's ex-boyfriend. He started posting her photos on social media, claiming how much he misses her and hopes that she would be in a better place. During the investigation, the police found 2 bullet holes outside Emma's room. The doctors told the police that Emma had been shot twice and 1 bullet had hit her ear, killing her instantly with the second one hitting her pillowcase. The police started interviewing all the suspects and one name kept coming up: William Riley Gall. Emma's parents and friends testified that Riley had been trying to scare Emma to get back with him. Riley's college roommate made a statement that the night before Emma's death, Riley had asked him how to remove fingerprints from a gun. This intrigued the police and they started investigating more about the 18-year-old college student. Riley had shared a secret with his friends that after he got kidnapped, he had taken a gun from his grandfather in order to protect himself. This made suspicions grow on him excessively. When the police checked out the records, it came out that Riley's grandfather had reported about his gun being stolen. There was no room for confusion anymore. Noah and Alex were Riley's best friends. They were also helping the police solving Emma's murder. The police asked the pair to secretly record Riley in trying him to confess murdering Emma. They both agreed and asked Riley questions about the homicide. Riley asked his best friends if they would help him get rid of the gun in the Tennessee River, as he could go to jail because of that. It was all clear at this point that Riley was the one who murdered his ex-girlfriend. The police took him into custody and asked him questions regarding the murderer. He kept denying it, yet his phone location showed otherwise. It was seen that Riley was outside Emma's house the night she got killed. It was 3 a.m. in the morning when Riley was seen going back to Maryville College. Along with that, the police also found black clothing and shoes in Riley's car, making it clear that it was him who was stalking Emma. The proofs were crystal clear, and 48 hours after Emma was murdered, Riley was in handcuffs. The trial of Riley Gall began, and it was argued that Riley was Emma's hero, and it was just as clumsy act to scare Emma off so she would come back together with him. His intentions were never to kill her. This verdict did not come through, and eventually the jury made its final decision. William Riley Gull was charged with the offense of first-degree murder as well as talking, theft, and being in possession of a firearm. He was sentenced to prison for lifetime with a maximum of 52 years to be even considered for parole. The case of Rua Pedro Terara. This horrible case took place in Lausada, a village situated in the northern region of Portugal, a location known for its vineyards, renowned green wine, and its distinction as the youngest population in the country. Nestled in the heart of the municipality bearing the same name, this village is in close proximity to the northwest coast of Portugal, a hub of summer enjoyment for tourists, hailing from various corners of Europe. Within this quaint village, on January 28, 1987, Rua Pedro Terara was born. His parents, Filomena and Manuel, lauded his lively and jovial nature, along with his remarkable creativity and imagination. In a nutshell, this family, complete with their youngest daughter, Karina, led a harmonious and contented life. Rua Pedro was a bundle of energy as a child. After completing his daily school assignments, he engaged in spirited soccer matches with his beloved cousin, Andre, and other local children. His aspiration was to become a professional goalkeeper, and thus he consistently played in that role. Among the boys, other pastimes was cycling, and he could often be spotted zipping through the village to ensure he reached his daily math tutoring sessions punctually. However, one shadow cast over his otherwise serene childhood. Rua Pedro grappled with epilepsy. Manuel and Filomena were the proprietors of a dragging school. One day, an ordinary young man named Afonso Diaz arrived at the academy with aspirations of obtaining his driver's license. Filomena swiftly discovered that Afonso was facing financial hardship. Renowned for her exceptional empathy, she immediately sought ways to assist him. Initially, she provided him with clothing, and as their bond deepened, she extended the opportunity for him to work at the school, enabling him to earn extra income. 3 years passed, and thanks to Filomena's kindness, Afonso became a truck driver at just 22 years old. The family trusted Afonso so much that they relied on him to pick up Rua Pedro and Karina from school and bring them back home. To do this, Afonso used his brother's car, a Fiat Uno, as they spent time together every day. An unusual friendship blossomed between Afonso and Rua Pedro. The family didn't think it was strange, especially because Afonso had a youthful and childlike personality, which made him and Rua Pedro feel like brothers. However, the maternal grandparents viewed their relationship with suspicion. Manuel, on the other hand, was concerned about Afonso smoking around the child, and considered him a bad influence. Worried about the consequences of this friendship, Manuel talked to Filomena about it, but she was convinced of Afonso's good character and believed he meant no harm. In the end, like in any good marriage, they reached a compromise, with Filomena agreeing to keep an eye on their interactions. On March 4, 1998, around 2 p.m., Rua Pedro rode his bicycle to his mother's workplace, which was just a few blocks away from home, to tell her that Afonso had invited him for a ride in his brother's car. Filomena wasn't happy about the idea and told him not to go. Instead, she sent him to a nearby field where his friends were waiting to play soccer, emphasizing the importance of making it to his 5 p.m. class on time. Though he was initially disappointed, Rua Pedro obeyed. He removed his bicycle helmet and headed to the soccer field. When he arrived, he found his friends, except for Joa Andre, whom his mother didn't allow to go out. Surprisingly, a black Fiat Uno driven by Afonso pulled into the field a few minutes later and stopped beside Rua Pedro. They had a short conversation, and then the child put aside his bicycle helmet, got into the car, and bid farewell to his friends through the passenger window with a simple gesture. Between 5 and 6 in the afternoon, a phone call shattered the family's peace and marked the start of the Terara family's worst days. Rua Pedro's tutor called to inform them that the boy hadn't attended his class. This was highly unusual since Rua Pedro had never missed a class before. Panic set in as his parents feared that an unexpected epileptic seizure might have rendered him unconscious, potentially causing severe brain damage if he didn't receive prompt attention. The news quickly spread throughout the village, and concerned residents sprang into action. They organized small search teams to cover the entire town. Soon, they found their first clue. A neighbor reported that around 3 p.m., he had spotted Rua Pedro's bicycle hidden among the bushes near the soccer field where he had been playing. Manuel and Filomena knew their son very well. They understood that his bicycle meant the world to him, and he wouldn't just leave it behind without a good reason. This led them to believe that Rua Pedro might have been taken against his will. Without hesitation, they rushed to the police station to report his disappearance. Upon receiving the report, the police launched their investigation by questioning the 3 boys who had been playing soccer with Rua Pedro. These friends recounted how a black car had entered the field to pick up their friend, identifying Afonso as the driver. They emphasized that Afonso's behavior had been strange and controlling toward their young companion. Initially, the officers doubted the children's accounts and chose to disregard their statements. However, they mentioned the misleading lead to the mother, which raised her suspicions. Filomena then mentioned Rua Pedro's request from that same afternoon to meet up with his friend. Immediately, everyone's attention turned to the truck driver, and the authorities proceeded to search his home. Afonso welcomed the officers who wanted to ask him some routine questions. As the last person who had seen the child, his statement could provide crucial information. However, the truck driver remained unusually calm and claimed not to have seen Rua Pedro. His reaction raised suspicion among the agents, given the numerous testimonies they had collected. Consequently, he was taken to the police station for further questioning. Once at the precinct, Afonso attempted to offer an excuse. He mentioned that his brother had asked him to take the car for its annual inspection, a mandatory requirement in Portugal for vehicles over 8 years old. However, records showed that he had never attended the scheduled appointment for that afternoon. Afonso persisted with his story, continuing to deny that the child had gotten into the car hours earlier. He admitted to a brief encounter of only 5 minutes with Rua Pedro before 2 p.m. Afterward, he claimed to have driven to a nearby town, which was about 15 kilometers from Losada, and parked in front of a pharmacy. Afonso asserted that he stayed in the car for a while before deciding to take a stroll through the city, even mentioning that he admired the shop windows. When he grew tired, he drove to his girlfriend's house, arriving at 6:45 p.m. The woman lived in another village in the region, just 11 minutes away from Losada. Meanwhile, at the police station reception, Rua Pedro's grandfather and cousin anxiously waited, determined to apply pressure to expedite the investigations. When Afonso's interrogation concluded, the two of them crossed paths with the suspect in the hallways. Upon seeing him, the grandfather desperately inquired about his grandson's whereabouts and offered anything in exchange for an answer. Afonso broke down in tears and insisted that he didn't know where the child was, but he warned that if they wanted to find him, it was essential to close all borders because he had probably been kidnapped and was on his way to a foreign country. The cousin also confronted Afonso and even mentioned a conversation they had with Rua Pedro the day before. The man's only response was to shout at the boy to be quiet once and for all, but the cousin remained unfazed. On the contrary, he continued the narrative with more details. Afonso had offered to take both of them to meet prostitutes and said that the meeting point would be a vacant lot. Following these events, a large-scale police investigation was launched in the region involving local residents, firefighters, and even the assistance of bloodhounds to find the trail of the lost child. The officers believed that the boy might have had a seizure and was unconscious somewhere in the village. Or maybe he had simply wandered far away and couldn't find his way back. In summary, they considered it a case of a search and rescue, ruling out the hypothesis of kidnapping. Rua Pedro's family was outraged by this approach to the case. Due to the extensive dissemination of Rua Pedro's images in the local media, a sex worker recognized his face and contacted the local police. She stated without hesitation that on March 4, 1998, a black car had stopped in front of her on a desolate road. The driver offered her $10 to have sex with the little boy who accompanied him. She asked how old the boy was, and the man replied that he was old enough. The woman took him behind some bushes by the side of the road and looked for a private place where no one could see them. There was no sexual contact. The little boy was very terrified, crying nonstop and repeating over and over again that he wanted to leave. Seeing the child in such a distraught state, the sex worker couldn't help but feel compassion for him. She spent around 15 minutes trying to comfort him. She hugged him tightly and assured him that everything would eventually be all right. Amidst his sobs, he confided in her that he had been forced to attend that meeting. After emerging from the bushes, the child got into the car, and that was the last time she saw him. All signs pointed to a kidnapping, but even with this compelling witness statement, the police still hesitated to fully embrace this theory. In a desperate plea, the family begged the authorities to act urgently, stressing that each passing moment could be critical to the child's survival. The following morning, just after the court's opening, they managed to persuade the public prosecutor's office to request the intervention of the judicial police, a specialized agency responsible for investigating serious crimes like homicides, kidnappings, organized crime, and terrorism. Within 24 hours of Rua Pedro's last sighting, several judicial police officers arrived in the town. In the subsequent days, alongside family members and neighbors, they meticulously combed through the entire region, suspecting that Rua Pedro might have been left somewhere. The distribution of posters featuring the child's photograph escalated, reaching a national level, and the entire country of Portugal was deeply shaken by the case. The disappearance of the child sparked an overwhelming sense of collective sorrow. People referred to Rua Pedro as our boy or our little Pedro. Simultaneously, the family began receiving a barrage of phone calls, many of which were tormenting and distressing. Some claimed to have Rua Pedro in their custody, while others provided leads to his whereabouts that ultimately led nowhere. The most audacious callers even demanded a ransom payment. One particular and terrifying call featured a child whose voice sounded eerily similar to Rua Pedro's. Amidst screams and tears, he desperately called out for his mother. Citing the challenge of tracing all communications, the police decided not to pursue any leads that came through phone calls. The family's desperation grew, and the omission of potentially valuable information for the ongoing investigation appeared both inept and negligent. In April 1998, 1 month after the disappearance, a suspicion emerged. A renowned Portuguese journalist traveled to Disneyland in Paris with his wife and children for a report intended to be published in a widely read magazine. With national circulation in Portugal, the article featured a series of portraits of him and his family at various park attractions. Among these images, one particular photograph raised alarm bells. In the background, a small child could be seen with a man dressed in red. Filomena and Manuel saw the photograph and firmly asserted that it was Rua Pedro. In September of the same year, a significant breakthrough occurred as the British police dismantled a pedophile network in an operation known as Operation Cathedral. This organization primarily operated online and served as a database with thousands of photos and videos depicting sexually abused children. This operation gained high-profile attention due to the unusually large amount of pornographic content possessed, produced, and distributed by this organization's members. Shockingly, they discovered more than 750,000 photos and 1,800 videos. Out of the 1,263 individuals featured in the seized material, only 17 were identified. 1 from Argentina, 1 from Chile, 1 from Portugal, 6 from the UK, and 7 from the United States. Filomena confirmed that Rua Pedro appeared in some of those photos, confirming that he was still alive but nothing more. There were no coordinates or leads to his possible location. The British police speculated that members of the network had abused him on camera and then potentially harmed him. Over the next 13 years, the Public Ministry of Portugal built a case against Afonso, who consistently maintained his innocence. The trial began in November 2011. The key testimonies came from Rua Pedro's 3 friends, forming the backbone of the case. While the judge could verify certain facts presented by the prosecution, the court dismissed several testimonies due to a lack of conclusive evidence. In March 2012, Afonso was acquitted. On Rua Pedro's 27th birthday, January 28, 2014, a video was published that quickly went viral on social media. Some actors voluntarily participated in this video campaign. Their aim was to search for new clues about Rua Pedro's whereabouts while also including the email addresses of the Northern Board of Judicial Police and the Portuguese Association for Missing Children to ensure that the young man's case would not fade into obscurity. This campaign had a broader goal of denouncing child trafficking for sexual exploitation. Returning to the legal proceedings, Afonso's freedom was short-lived. After an appeal by Rua Pedro's family in 2014, a new ruling from the Porto Court of Appeals sentenced him to 3 years in prison. This sentence was for inciting a minor to engage in involuntary sexual relations, but it was not related to the kidnapping or any other charges linked to the disappearance itself. Despite Afonso's defense attorney filing an appeal, this second ruling was confirmed by the Portuguese Supreme Court. On October 3, 2014, the resolution was ratified. And on March 18, 2015, Afonso was taken into custody after the police issued an arrest warrant. He was released on parole in March 2017, having served only 2/3 of his sentence. Afonso continued to maintain his innocence, claiming to be the victim of a grave injustice. 20 years after the disappearance in 2019, Rua Pedro was officially declared presumed dead. The police concluded their search as no further leads had emerged since Operation Cathedral and the case had gone cold. The young man's whereabouts remain a painful mystery. Despite the ceaseless pain and the enduring void of not knowing what happened to her son, Filomena did not give up. In 2007, she founded the Association of Relatives of Missing Children. Rua Pedro's case highlighted a grave issue. We are confronted with a deeply serious phenomenon. Every year, 3 million children are kidnapped worldwide. In Portugal alone, there are over 60 missing children and minors. Plette Jabara Farah, it's every parent's worst nightmare to put their child to sleep at night and then find them vanish before daybreak. Well, that's exactly what happened to Plette Jabara Farah. The worst part was that she was unexpectedly found between something no one ever thought about. Plette Jabara Farah was 4 years old when she mysteriously disappeared from her house on March 22, 2010. The case became prominent because she lived in one of the most upscale neighborhoods in Mexico and Huizcalucan. She had recently returned from a trip with her father Mauricio Guber and sister, but her mother, Lizette Farah, had gone on a trip with her friend, Amanda de la Rosa, her lover, and multiple other men. Suspicions of her infidelity made Lizette the prime suspect in the case. The case became even more complicated when the family and 2 housekeepers provided inconsistent statements to the authorities. Plette was born with both physical disabilities and a language disorder and had 2 nannies who helped care for her, Erica and Martha Casimiro. The family was considered relatively affluent. Plette's father, Mauricio Guber, worked in real estate while her mom, Lizette Farah, was an attorney. On one evening in 2010, Lizette claimed she had put her little girl to bed as normal, but when her nanny Erica came into her room the next morning, the little girl was nowhere to be seen. There were no signs of forced entry into the house or any indication that a struggle had taken place. The CCTV cameras, which surrounded the property where Plette Jabara Farah lives, failed to show either when the child was leaving or being taken. The house had 2 family dogs that never made any noise during the night either. Where could the 4-year-old have gone without a single trace? The story quickly turned into a media frenzy. Flyers were posted, billboards were erected, and ads were all over the TV and on public transport. Lizette even made a public plea on television for her daughter's abductor to come forward. The search sparked a great deal of public interest, but soon, many started placing the blame on Plette's parents. The local community all came together to search for Plette, but nothing was found. Alberto Basbas, the Attorney General of the state, became involved and launched what would become a huge 9-day intensive search and investigation. His involvement became the initial controversy. Many children are said to be reported missing in Mexico, but it wasn't until Plette Jabara Farah, from a richer family, went missing that authorities put all their resources into finding her. Ultimately, police were baffled and found it very difficult to find the lead. What followed was the huge 9-day search, with the community coming together to begin a tireless hunt for the little girl. A week after the disappearance of Plette, it was announced that her parents and nannies were taken into custody. The first suspect identified in the case was Lizette. The stories which Paulette's parents and the nannies shared had inconsistencies, and the media and public began to become suspicious. This is when a shocking revelation came to light. According to a Mexican news report, Zocalo, there were some undercover recordings of Paulette's parents and their other daughter found. This contained a conversation that sounded like Lizette telling her daughter not to admit anything to the investigators. Otherwise, she'd get in trouble. Was she responsible for the disappearance of Plette? However, Lizette claimed she was taken out of context. Both of Paulette's nannies, Erica and Martha Casimiro, claimed that the girl's parents seemed unconcerned while everyone was frantically searching for her. Even Lizette's media appearances made people uncomfortable. Her cold nature made people wonder if she was the one responsible for the death of her daughter. It was revealed that Lizette could have had a personality or mental disorder. According to Sandra Yadium, a legal psychiatric expert working with investigators, said, Lizette has always remained very distant in matters of affection and emotional attachment. In short, some characteristics pointed toward a mental disorder. A further twist in the story was that when Plette, who had gone missing for 9 days, was somehow found in the same bedroom in which she was sleeping before her disappearance. An officer in the case caught a whiff of a petrified smell. This led him to find where Plette, the very bed from which she disappeared. On March 31, 2010, Paulette's body was finally found. It was a bizarre finding as she was tucked away at the foot of the bed. The autopsy, as reported by CNN, ruled that Paulette's death was an accident. As it was reported that she had seemingly rolled to the foot of the bed and accidentally fell and lodged herself in the gap between the mattress and footboard. She then suffocated to death. According to reports at the time, the autopsy showed that Plette died via asphyxiation that obstructed the respiratory airways and compressed the abdominal thorax. There were no drugs or toxic substances found in her body or any signs of physical abuse. According to the San Diego Union Tribune, moreover, Basbas believed that Paulette's body hadn't been moved. The position the child was in when she was found was the same as the position she was when she died. That is, the original and final position is the same, he claimed in the Union Tribune. But conspiracy theories around Paulette's cause of death still abound. Someone noticed a pair of pajamas on top of the bed while Lizette was giving a TV interview before Plette was found. When Plette was discovered, she was wearing those same pajamas. It could be true that the girl had multiple pairs of the same pajamas, but the coincidence was still eerie. Conspiracy theorists, however, focused on how everyone managed to miss where Paulette's body was for 9 long days. The police even brought in search dogs at one point. BBC reported that over 100 people had been in her room, searching for her. More disturbingly, friends and family had slept in her bed during that period, per the Union Tribune's report, and didn't notice anything. The only explanation given was that there was enough bedding and blankets to mask the smell of the decomposing body for 9 days. But the nannies were adamant that they would have noticed the shiveled bedding or some kind of evidence that the child had fallen in between the bed and frame. The public found it hard to believe that authorities had investigated Paulette's room multiple times and came up with nothing. Many still believe that because of the negative publicity and Basba's initial inclination to point fingers at Lizette and Mauricio, the parents were possibly involved in their little girl's death somehow. Lizette and Mauricio ended up turning on each other publicly. According to Mauricio, he said, in a separate interview with Televisa, Lizette cried and said she didn't understand why her husband would be suspicious of her and claimed investigators had possibly manipulated him to turn on her. Lizette claimed, "What do you think of this little girl's death?" Patricia Columbbo. Having been sentenced to 200 to 300 years in prison means a lot, and that is what this case is all about. 20-year-old Patricia had left her family home 2 years earlier to live with DeLuca, a 36-year-old married man. When Patricia was 16 years old, she worked in a suburban coffee shop where she met pharmacist Frank DeLuca, who managed a pharmacy next door to the coffee shop where she works. DeLuca and Patricia developed some sort of chemistry, and with a duo, Things led to another in which he hired her to work in a store, and the two began an unusual sexual relationship. Patricia showed classmates pictures of her having sex with DeLuca's dog. DeLuca and Patricia's relationship was growing so deep and out of hand at the same time, considering the fact her lover was a married man and the relationship was made public. In April 1974, DeLuca brought Patricia to stay in his own home, even though he still lived with his wife and 5 kids. However, she accepted to move into her lover's home, but she simply told her parents she was moving to her apartment. Her parents were relieved when she told them she was going to move into her apartment and not some random person's home, which prompted her parents to give her money for upkeep. Patricia wasn't able to keep up with the lies that she had told her parents, and soon they found out that DeLuca had left his wife and moved in with her daughter, prompting Patricia's father to beat DeLuca severely. The situation triggered some sort of hatred from the duo towards Columbbo's family, which made them come up with a plan that changed things from bad to worse. On May 4, 1976, Patricia Columbbo, who was 19 then, and Frank DeLuca, 39, decided to carry out a plan on Columbbo's family. After several deliberations on how to carry out the plan, the duo came up with a plan. The duo was ready to execute their much-deliberated plan. They observed the environment and later crept into the home of Columbus and shot every living creature found therein. On May 7, 1976, Chicago police found a car belonging to one of Elk Grove residents, Frank Columbbo, abandoned after apparently being stolen. The Chicago police more counterparts and outgrow. However, the bodies of everyone killed weren't discovered until 3 days later on May 7th, when a village police officer showed up to inform Frank that one of the family cars had been found in a poor black neighborhood on the city's west side. The responding officer who went to Frank Columbbo's residence to inquire about the car noticed the front door ajar and delivered newspapers piled up on the front step of the otherwise immaculately landscaped home. The patrolman pushed open the door and saw Frank's body sprawled across the living room stairs with a piece of the bowling trophy sticking out of his gashed skull, and immediately radioed for backup. Even though the family's car had been found miles away in Chicago, there were no indications that anything else in the house had been disturbed or taken. What he had seen was no ordinary crime. The Elk Grove community was thrown into confusion when the family was discovered dead. Police began investigation upon investigation to connect the dot of the murder, but there was no lead. Frank, 43 years old, who was the father, had been shot 4 times in the head. Before he died, however, he had been cruelly tortured and beaten. Police reported he had been beaten with a bowling trophy and the lamp so severely that the back of his head was disintegrated. There were several cigarette burns on his body, and he had also been stabbed in the throat and chest. His wife Mary, who was 41 years, was shot once between the eyes. It was reported that her throat had been slashed, and she also had been beaten, this time with a glass vase. She was clad in a nightgown and her underwear had been pulled down to her ankles. However, an autopsy later revealed there were no signs of sexual assault. Their son Michael, who was 13 years old, was also killed. He had also been shot, beaten with a bowling trophy, and stabbed over 80 times, mostly in the neck with a pair of sewing scissors. There were indications that he had been sleeping when the attack occurred, and was awakened and forced out of bed by his killers. The only surviving member of the family was the Columbus 19-year-old daughter Patricia, who was living apart from her family with a 37-year-old co-worker, Frank DeLuca. Police questioned Patricia, but had no reason to suspect her until the following week, as some of her behavior raised red flags to investigators. Ray Rose, the investigating detective, said that he has never forgotten what he saw that day. Evil, death, tragedy were his initial thoughts when he saw the carnage. What I saw was very curious. Rose told the Sun-Times in May 2006, "If you had just found out your whole family had been killed, you'd run to the scene." Patricia and DeLuca had initially wanted to stage the murders to make them look like mob hits or the work of black street gangs. Patricia went to the police station and began suggesting possible motives and leads. One, which was quickly ruled out, was that Frank Columbbo was the target of a mob hit. There was never any sign that he was in any way connected to organized crime. Lying to police in the course of a murder investigation is never a good idea, and when you're the sole surviving member of the family, it's an even worse decision. As a result of Patricia's statements and behavior after the crimes, Patricia Columbbo became the chief suspect. In all bids to unravel the true case of the murder of Columbbo's family, a hint came in. Inspired by the promise of reward money, a friend led police to the men who had discussed killing the Columbbo family with Patricia. The detectives quickly established roles for themselves to make Patricia crack. Instead of good cop, bad cop, one detective described as looking like Tom Jones assumed the role of boyfriend. At her family's wake and funeral, Patty flirted openly with the detective, to the point where her grieving relatives thought he was the despised DeLuca who had alienated her from her family. DeLuca's caught a notice in the corner of the funeral home. When Patricia wasn't joking, smoking, or flirting, she flung herself on top of her parents' and little brother's closed caskets, wailing with grief. After the couple was arrested, DeLuca's employees revealed that they had seen him washing and burning blood-stained clothes on the day after the murders. He had kept them silent by threatening their families. DeLuca attempted to have these witnesses killed by a cellmate, but another inmate thwarted the plan by telling the police. Rose, the investigating detective, chronicled how Columbbo, then 19, plotted for 8 months to kill her family, soliciting friends and acquaintances to carry out the murders. The investigating detective revealed that in the summer of 1975, Patricia met 2 men that she seduced and tried to hire to kill her family. Patricia claims one of the men forced her to have sex. She provided them with a diagram of the Columbbo home and photos of the family. However, the men did not act on her request, and on May 4, 1976, she and DeLuca, her 37-year-old boyfriend, entered the home and attacked her family. During the course of interrogation, Patricia revealed that she wanted to beat her father to the punch, claiming she feared he had ordered a hit on her and her lover. Evidence revealed that the duo were willing participants in the murder, with Patricia acting as a decoy to be admitted to the house. When Frank Columbbo opened the door and turned around, DeLuca entered and shot him with a .32 caliber handgun. During a detailed narration of how the incidents occurred, it was revealed that DeLuca, who did the shooting, shot Frank, who had been killed first as he tried to escape by running up the living room stairs. Patricia bludgeoned her father with a bowling trophy. Mary was found cowering in the bathroom, her favorite room in the house where she had once lovingly hand-painted each bathroom tile with gold filigree, who had been shot dead center between the eyes. Patricia or DeLuca slit her throat just in case the bullet didn't take care of her. Although the Cook County medical examiner said that Mary was probably dead before she even hit the floor. The last victim was Michael, who had slept through the initial gunshots. The two woke Michael up and stood him upright, half asleep in his bedroom, while DeLuca shot him. Patty then stabbed Michael 87 times with her mother's sewing scissors. When police found Michael's body, they said at first glance it looked as if Michael has had a case of the measles, until they realized that the measles were dozens of tiny red gashes. DeLuca admitted to shooting the victims. However, Columbbo to date has not owned up to her part in the murders. A few days later, Patty was charged with recounts of first-degree premeditated murder. In detailed evidence tendered to the court, the cops determined that Patricia had originally set out to hire hitmen, a couple of losers she met in a motel cocktail lounge, to murder her family. She had even gone so far as to draw a map of her parents' house, along with a warning that the family's white miniature poodle was a yapper. After the supposed hitman had strung Patty along, having sex with her and ripping her off of $2,000, Patty persuaded DeLuca to help her carry out the job. Columbbo and DeLuca were convicted of shooting her parents, Mary and Frank Columbbo, and brother Michael, and mutilating their bodies. They sentenced both to 200 to 300 years in prison for the murders, and another 150 years each for conspiracy to commit murder. Columbbo received an additional 50-year prison term for solicitation to commit murder. It all ended badly for the lovers who wanted to have it all at all costs. The Lynn family murder. The Lynn family lived in North Epping, New South Wales of Australia, and they were an upright family who had their needs met. The husband Min Lynn and his wife Lily Lynn ran a successful family-owned newsagent in Sydney. Min and Lily had 3 children: June Brenda, who was 15, Henry, who was 12, and Terry, who was 9. The Lynn family also had Lily's sister Irene living with the family. The family had a cordial relationship where everyone openly expressed whatever was on their mind. It was a family with no secrecy as they lived and worked together. Things were all smooth and rosy for the Lynn family before something unexpected happened, which ruined the family forever. During the early hours of one Saturday morning in July 2009, when the busy shop of Lynn's family didn't open for business, it was odd for almost everyone who knew the shop. However, Kathy, who was also Lily's sister and happened to work in the news agency, began to receive calls from curious customers about why the shop was locked. Upon hearing the situation of things, Kathy began to suspect something wasn't right with the shop being locked. This prompted Kathy and her husband Robert Shee to go check the home of Min and Lily. As they arrived at the Lynn family residence in the quiet suburb of North Epping, the front door, which was usually locked, was unlocked. Kathy was beginning to feel frightened about the development. As she and her husband took steps forward, they could see sprinkles of blood here and there. They took a bold decision to be sure of what was happening or might have happened. They went upstairs in the bedroom, and what she found next was a horrifying scene that kept her shivering for some minutes. Both men and Lily were drenched in a pool of blood, bludgeoned to death by a weapon later described as hammer-like. In the next room, they found Kathy and Lily's sister Irene with the same awful fate. Both men and Lily's young sons, 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry, were not spared either of this gruesome attack. They too were brutally murdered similarly like every other person in the house. In their bedroom, blood splattered all over the walls of Lynn's house, which suggested that a great struggle had taken place before the gruesome attack. Kathy placed a call to the local police informing them about the gruesome situation which had occurred at the residence of the Lynns. She could not utter her words fluently, as she was shivering about her extended family who had just been horrifically murdered. The situation had a little twist here. Brenda, who was the only member of the Lynn's family, was paired as she was away on a school excursion in New Caledonia at the time of the gruesome attack. Brando was still at the school excursion when she learned about the gruesome killing of her family through Facebook. The police and paramedics did arrive at the scene, but it was so gruesome that they had to implore forensic analysts to help identify the members, since the faces of the family were beyond recognition. They later concluded that the weapon that was used was likely to be a hammer. It only went from bad to worse as Brenda and the extended family had to live with a new harsh reality. Days after the incident, Kathy and her husband were finally composed enough to make emotional public pleas, calling for support to help solve the murders. Brenda, who is the only daughter and the only surviving child of the Lynn from the gruesome attack, went on to live with the Shees as they initiated the idea for her to come live with them and be a part of their new family, as she has no other place to go to at the time. However, the lack of strong leads as well as the nature of the vicious attacks suggested a more personal motive than a simple burglary gone wrong. The authorities turned to family members and possible connections for their investigation. Robert Shee, a former ear, nose and throat specialist in China before moving to Melbourne in 2006, was one of the early suspects, as many indications pointed to him. According to the Daily Telegraph, Shee had opened a restaurant in Melbourne, but when his new venture soon failed, he and his wife Kathy moved to Sydney and had been unemployed ever since. Various reports had also suggested that she was close to his extended family. It would take over a year for any breakthrough evidence to surface. During a forensic examination of Shee's garage in May 2010, experts found a tiny stain on the floor of the unkempt garage, known as Stain 91. According to The Australian, one of the forensic experts trained in bloodstain pattern analysis was convinced that Stain 91 looked like a transfer stain, the kind of stain produced from coming into contact with an object such as clothing, a weapon, or a bag wet with blood. Lab tests, however, proved that the tiny mark was consistent with the DNA of the slain Lynn family members. She was subsequently arrested in May 2011, while his wife Kathy maintained his innocence. As all these new developments were happening, Brenda was still living with her new family. It took 4 trials spanning over 7.5 years before she was convicted. The first trial was aborted when a possible sexual motive emerged, but the court refused to identify the victim as she was still a minor at that point. She later opened up on how Robert has been sexually assaulting her in her home while her parents were still alive, and how he continued to assault her after Kathy and Robert took her in as a new family. The second trial was halted when the judge fell ill, while the third trial ended in a hung jury. Finally, in 2017, she was found guilty of murder. After the verdict was announced, she proclaimed, "Did not murder the Lynn family. I am innocent." In a recount by Brenda, the only surviving child of the gruesome incident that claimed the lives of the Lynn family, she said that it was 2009 and the high school student was preparing to fly to New Caledonia for an excursion, and looked around the departure gate to see her classmates kissing their families goodbye. Being a prideful teenager, I did not say anything to my father. I just stood there awkwardly and thought to myself, it's just going to be a week. I am going to see them again really soon. Ms. Lynn, now in her 20s, told a sentencing hearing for her Uncle Robert she last week. But while she was overseas, she murdered her entire family. Her father Min Norman Lynn, her mother Yoon Lee Lily Lynn, her aunt Yoon Ben Irene Lynn, and her two little brothers Henry and Terry in the bedrooms of their North Epping home on July 18, 2009. To this day, my biggest regret was not hugging my father and telling him I loved him. To say thank you for being an amazingly loving and caring parent. Murder in the Vatican. Emanuela Orlandi was born and raised in Vatican City, the Pope's residence and a major tourist destination. She was on her way home from a flute lesson on June 22, 1983 when she vanished. She called home later that evening and spoke with one of her sisters, but her family never heard from her after that. Orlandi was last seen at a bus station in Rome city center before disappearing forever. In July 2019, forensic researchers discovered a strangely empty crypt while searching for Orlandi's remains. Since 1983, the Orlandi family has been following leads concerning Emmanuel's disappearance, which has taken them down some unusual paths. They petitioned the Vatican in 2019 to gain access to Princess Sophie of Hohenlohe's grave, which she died in 1836. In an anonymous letter, a source directed them to the tomb, and they opened two burial sites where Orlandi's remains were allegedly buried. There was no trace of Orlandi or anyone else when the experts opened the tomb. Although no one had been inside the tomb since 1836, it was evident that something unusual had occurred. There were no human skeletons or burial urns to be found. The Vatican had anticipated finding two tombs, but not two empty tombs. They were absolutely bamboozled. The Orlandi family has had to deal with a slew of bizarre tips and suspicions concerning Emmanuel's whereabouts. The evidence varies from hearsay to cryptic musings, all of which raise more questions than they answer. Pietro Orlandi has received a plethora of information concerning his sister, and he is prone to following up on any leads he has provided, no matter how bizarre they may appear. Emanuela Orlandi's family has heard every explanation about her disappearance. Many of the tips they get come from people who think they saw her in a crowd, but the details seem more like movie plots than real-life scenarios. Regardless of how bizarre some of these leads are, the family investigates them in the hopes of learning more about Orlandi's disappearance. In 2008, Sabrina Minardi, who dated mobster Enrico De Pitas, claimed that she had been kidnapped by American Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, the former president of the Vatican Bank. But it's unclear why he allegedly wanted her off the streets. Marcinkus died in 2006, and despite his involvement in an Italian banking crisis in the 1980s, no allegations of kidnapping or child endangerment were ever made. The Vatican simply stated that Minardi's claims came from a source whose value is exceedingly doubtful. Some have claimed to have seen Orlandi alive over the years. The Orlandi family is still hoping to find Emanuela alive after 3 decades of searching, no matter how unlikely it seems. Some of those who claim to have seen Orlandi believe they've run into her on the street, with tales coming in from as far as Turkey and England. Others, on the other hand, appear to be more interested in personal gain. An anonymous phone call was made to a television show about Orlandi's appearance in 2005, alerting the family to a local mobster's tomb. To solve the case, go see who's buried in the crypt of the Basilica of Santa Apollinare. The caller stated, referring to the burial of former mobster Enrico De Pitas, who died in a gun duel in 1990. The same caller stated that Cardinal Ugo Plette, Rome's vicar general at the time, ordered Orlandi to be taken off the streets. The tipper, however, did not provide any additional information on Plette's involvement, nor did he provide any evidence to back up his claim. When forensic experts explored the grave, they discovered not just the Petty's remains, but also numerous more bones. The police claimed they'd analyzed the remains to see if any belonged to Orlandi at the time, but no findings have been released. Despite all of the hints that have been thrown out to the press since Orlandi's disappearance in the early 1980s, no one has ever been arrested. Anonymous sources have mentioned several Italian mobsters in the news, but none have ever been officially linked to Orlandi. Mehmet Ali Agha's ludicrous assertions were essential in hindering the further investigation into the issue. Bulgarian spies and the KGB have also been blamed for the crime. In addition to the Grey Wolves and a nebulous Masonic organization, Roberto Calvi, one of the suspects, was discovered hanged in London just before Orlandi vanished. Everyone, including prominent members of the Vatican, seems to have an opinion about Emanuela Orlandi's disappearance. The Vatican's leading exorcist, Father Gabriel Amorth, believes Orlandi was kidnapped to be shuttled around sex parties and used as a slave. The allegation is debatable, and Amorth has no evidence to back it up. But he is adamant in his conviction. In addition to his theories concerning Orlandi's presumed captivity, Amorth is convinced that someone from the Vatican assisted in her abduction and that she has since died. He told the publication La Stampa, Foreign Embassy to the Holy See were participating in the network. Emanuela, I feel, became a victim of this circle. Emanuela Orlandi's family has concluded that more than one person is responsible for her abduction, decades after she went. They haven't indicated whether they believe the death was caused by a government or religious organization, but her brother, Pietro Orlandi, finds it inexplicable that no one has come forward with concrete evidence. Capable of accepting injustices, especially when it involves my sister, especially knowing that there are people who know what transpired throughout the years. Their right to know the truth and their right to be treated fairly are precious rights to me that no one can ever take away. Ricky McCormack's last and only cipher, Ricky McCormack, was discovered dead in a cornfield in West Alton, Missouri on June 30th, 1999. 2 pages of the handwritten notes in McCormack's front pocket included a complicated cipher that the FBI, the American Cryptogram Association, and countless amateur codebreakers have yet to decode. According to a family relative, McCormack was a high school dropout who could not write and code. He couldn't spell a word and could only doodle. Authorities had to use fingerprints to make a definitive ID because McCormack's body had been rotting in the field for several days before being discovered. Even after an autopsy and a toxicology report, medical examiners struggled to pinpoint the cause of death due to the rate of decomposition. However, detectives classed his death as a homicide after considering the suspicious aspect of where his body was discovered, as the region has previously been used to dump murder victims. The 2 notes discovered in McCormack's pocket had 30 lines of seemingly random letters and numbers on them. Some of the code is enclosed in parentheses, while others are circled. McCormack was an ex-con who worked part-time at a gas station and went back and forth between staying with relatives and living on the streets. He also had heart and lung problems and was receiving disability benefits at the time of his death. He had a slew of offenses on his record, as well as a spell in prison for statutory rape. Even though McCormack did not own a car and public transportation did not serve the region where he was discovered, his body was discovered 50 miles from his home. According to his ex-girlfriend, McCormack traveled by bus to Florida sometimes, where he allegedly served as a courier for drug dealers, transporting marijuana back to Missouri. McCormack's mental state has been the subject of various reports. McCormack's public attorney claimed he was suffering from some mental sickness or defect while awaiting trial for statutory rape. They had him evaluated by a local psychologist, who determined that McCormack was mentally capable of standing trial. McCormack was described as street smart, with an active imagination and a naive childlike attitude toward the world, while never having been diagnosed with any mental illnesses. McCormack's fiancée reported a few days before his death that he was agitated and apprehensive after returning from a cocaine smuggling job in Florida. In the days leading up to his death, he visited various hospitals for treatment of chest problems and asthma. Some investigators believe he wasn't asking for medical help, but rather a safe place to remain since he feared his life was in danger. The FBI's Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit had spent all of its efforts cracking the encryption by 2011. In a 2011 statement, the FBI stated, "Breaking the code could expose the victim's whereabouts before his death and potentially lead to the solution of a homicide." According to some family members, Ricky had been writing in code since he was a child. The notes are said to be real by experts, including the FBI agent in charge of the case. Small characteristics in the handwriting, such as circles around sections of the code, suggest it was a personal document, potentially a to-do list. According to the FBI, the most difficult aspect of this case is that McCormack most likely wanted the notes to be read only by him. Unlike him, other well-known ciphers, such as the Zodiac Killer, wished for their codes to be solved at some point. Of course, there's a chance McCormack didn't develop the code. Specialists haven't been able to establish the notes are in his handwriting decisively. It's also possible that the code was developed for him by the drug traffickers for whom he worked, or that he was simply carrying the cipher from one location to another without realizing its significance. The FBI has set up a website dedicated to the case, inviting amateur code breakers to participate in the investigation. Ultimately, it is thought that the code contains information that will aid in the capture of McCormack's killers. Who burnt alive the Istl woman? In 1970, at the height of the Cold War, a burnt body of a lady was discovered in a remote part of Norway. She had taken sleeping drugs, ingested carbon monoxide, and had been burned alive, according to an autopsy. Luggage belonging to the woman was later discovered, containing money from several different countries. She was eventually detected traveling around Europe with several fraudulent passports using various aliases. A family trekking in the Istl Valley near Bergen in western Norway came across the woman's burnt body. She was badly burned in the front and discovered with her hands lifted to her chest in a defensive stance. Personal items such as a watch, an umbrella, some jewelry, and many empty bottles were strewn about the body. Authorities believed the things were unusually positioned around the body, almost as if they were part of a ceremony. Her clothes were composed of synthetic fibers and didn't have any tags on them. Initially, it was assumed that she was in her 30s. She had eaten between 50 and 70 tablets of phenobarbital and had bruises around her neck. She had also breathed carbon monoxide and soot, indicating that she had been burned alive. Her death was considered suicide by Norwegian officials due to the lack of identifying documents and the presence of a substantial amount of sleeping tablets in her system. A few days later, a pair of luggage containing fingerprints matching the murdered woman was discovered at a train station in Bergen. Inside were wigs, makeup, clothing, eczema ointment, non-prescription eyeglasses, maps, and small sums of money from Norway, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and Belgium. 100 Deutsche Marks were also hidden inside the case's lining. Any identifying information had been disconnected, cut out, or rubbed off. Even the eczema cream, which usually included the name of the prescribing doctor on the packaging, couldn't provide a clue. The sophisticated dental work of the ISDF, as she claimed to be Claudia Tield from Brussels at one hotel. She was Elizabeth Lynn Hofer from a stand in another. People who interacted with her were eventually tracked down and interviewed. They all spoke of a gorgeous, stylish woman with black hair and brown eyes who was attractive, pleasant, and only paid in cash. She also wore wigs, spoke numerous languages, including French, Flemish, and English, and seemed tense most of the time. Years later, the Norwegian National Defense released information indicating the woman may have been traveling around the country watching the testing of the top-secret anti-ship Penguin missile. A fisherman had noticed the woman following the movements of Norwegian army troops. Is there any logic to this pie story? During the Cold War, Norway was a hotspot in the early 1970s. It not only shared a border with the Soviet Union, but it also assisted the United States and the United Kingdom in monitoring Russian nuclear testing and submarine warfare. Russian intelligence assets, as well as components from the CIA, MI6, and Mossad, were known to be present in the country. After seeing a sketch of the Istl woman in 2005, a man from Bergen came forward. He reported seeing a person matching her description, hiking on a hillside approximately an hour away from Istl, 5 days before her body was discovered in 1970. She was dressed inappropriately for the weather and was being pursued by 2 males who looked Southern, according to him. He told the cops what he observed, but they dismissed his claim. A section of the lower jaw of the Istl woman was removed and saved before she was buried. Her teeth showed traces of extensive dental surgery, which was unusual for Norway at the period. In 2017, a stable isotope examination of her teeth revealed that she was born in Nuremberg around 1930 and grew up near the French-German border. Her dental work was found to have been done in Central Asia, East Asia, Southern Europe, and South America. The case continues to pique people's interest. In 2018, the BBC World Service and the Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation released a podcast called Death in Ice Valley, which delves into the death of the Istl women in great detail. While the stable isotope study provided answers to some concerns, such as the woman's age and birth country, many more remain unanswered. Was she a saboteur? If that's the case, who killed her and why? Who was she employed by? What's more, why haven't any of her friends, family, or loved ones come forward? This is a case that might remain shrouded in mystery forever. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.